Long before the arrival of Turkic empires in the 11th century, Armenians had already spent over 1,000 years building a civilization and a distinct cultural identity in Anatolia. Look at this map of the Ottoman Empire as it stood on the eve of World War I. Out of a total population of roughly 15 to 17 million people in border. To understand how these communities functioned within the empire, we have to look at the Millet system. Under Sharia law, society was explicitly stratified. The Sultan and Muslim populations sat at the top, while Armenians were classified as dhimmis, non-Muslim subjects placed in a legally subordinate tier. This arrangement was a highly transactional social contract. Armenians were required to pay a special, heavier tax. In return, the state granted them basic property rights, freedom of worship, and physical protection. A handful of Armenian merchants in Western cities managed to build visible wealth and prominence in commerce, but the reality for the vast majority in the eastern provinces was much harsher. They were peasant farmers living in semi-feudal conditions, frequently subjected to illegal taxation and forced labor by local landlords. The state referred to them as the loyal Millet, but their safety depended entirely on their continued subservience. They possessed zero political power, meaning they had no leverage or legal recourse if the state ever decided to withdraw its protection. In the late 19th century, the Ottoman Empire began to visibly fracture. A series of humiliating military defeats stripped the empire of vast portions of its peripheral territories. This territorial collapse triggered a massive demographic crisis. Hundreds of thousands of displaced Muslim refugees, particularly Circassians who were fleeing Russian expansion in the Caucasus, poured into the Anatolian heartland looking for safety and land. The government, under Sultan Abdul Hamid II, solved this resettlement problem through a systematic campaign of land theft. The state confiscated Armenian-owned farms and properties in the eastern provinces and handed them directly to the newly arrived Muslim immigrants. The situation deteriorated until international powers intervened. Following the Russo-Turkish War in 1878, European nations forced the Ottoman government to sign treaties guaranteeing the physical safety and equal rights of its Armenian subjects. But these treaties severely backfired. Ottoman leadership resented the European interference and began viewing the previously loyal Armenians as a treasonous internal Trojan horse working on behalf of foreign imperialists. European attempts to legally mandate equality weaponized Armenian identity, causing the state to reclassify them as an existential threat to Ottoman sovereignty. The government's paranoia quickly materialized into violence. In 1891, the state created the Hamidiya regiments, paramilitary cavalry units formed primarily from local Kurdish tribes. The Sultan granted these regiments absolute impunity. Between 1895 and 1896, they unleashed a wave of massacres across the empire, killing at least 100,000 Armenians. The state orchestrated these killings as a deliberate strategy to force Armenian emigration and restore Muslim supremacy in the region. The events of the 1890s permanently shattered the illusion of the protected Millet. The Ottoman state proved it was entirely willing to use mass slaughter as a tool for demographic engineering. In 1908, the Young Turk Revolution briefly promised a way out. The revolutionaries restored the Ottoman constitution, generating widespread euphoria and the hope for a pluralistic society where all ethnicities would be treated equally. That hope lasted less than a year. In 1909, a conservative counter-coup in Adana resulted in the slaughter of over 20,000 Armenians. Local Ottoman soldiers did not protect the citizens. They actively armed the rioters. Then came the definitive catalyst, the 1912 and 1913 Balkan Wars. The empire lost almost all its European territory. Hundreds of thousands of displaced Balkan Muslims poured eastward into the Anatolian heartland, bringing horrific accounts of atrocities and fueling massive anti-Christian sentiment. The deep trauma of the Balkan Wars killed the dream of a multi-ethnic empire. It was replaced by a fiercely insular survival mentality and a widespread societal desire for revenge. In 1913, a secretive political faction known as the Committee of Union and Progress, or the CUP, seized dictatorial one-party control of the government. They immediately began repressing all internal opposition. The CUP completely abandoned Ottoman pluralism. To preserve the collapsing state, they turned to a radical, exclusionary brand of Turkish nationalism. Their geopolitical worldview was simple and absolute. They claimed the Anatolian landmass as the final, untouchable refuge of the Turkish nation. This logic sealed the fate of the Ottoman Armenians. Because their historical homeland was located in eastern Anatolia, CUP leaders came to view the Armenian population as an internal tumor that had to be excised before they could seek their own independence. The 1915 genocide emerged as the calculated climax of decades of land theft and failed reforms, driven by a dying empire's desperate pivot toward an ethno-nationalist state.